Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. We have a good number of attendees, and I see people continuing to join. So we'll just do a quick icebreaker before kicking off the webinar. In the meanwhile, it'll just take a couple of 1 or 2 minutes. So I'm going to launch a poll, and you can select the option that you think is correct. So just give me a second while I launch it. Okay, so yes, so the question is, and this is from the Action Toolkit on Women and the Net Zero Economy by Business Fights Poverty that Alice will be talking about later. For many companies, what percentage of emissions come from Scope 3 emissions, which are outside their direct control and sit largely in raw materials production and consumer use of products? So there are four options. Four ranges. So 50 to 80%, 55 to 85%, 60 to 90%, or 65 to 95%. So just, you can select the option that you think is, and I hope everyone can see it.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, we have people responding. Just give everyone maybe 30 seconds to answer. Okay, we have 15 responses and we have what, 29 people. So come on, guys.
I was just smiling to myself, thinking I better get this one right.
Okay, we have about 11 more people who should come on, guys. It's okay if you get it wrong. Okay, so maybe I will just close it. So the correct answer is actually 65 to 95%, which is the last option. So 65 to 95% of the emissions for many companies come from Scope 3 emissions. Okay, so I'm just going to close it. And we can just start in a minute. Okay, people can continue to join. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Zara Keser. I'm the Gender and Economic Inclusion Consultant for IFC, and I'd like to welcome you all to this Climate to Equal webinar on gender inclusive supply chains for net zero in collaboration with the Pakistan Business Council and the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt. So Climate2Equal is a peer learning platform that brings together private companies pledging on gender inclusive climate action. And it aims to build on the awareness and skills and commitment of private companies to include women in company-led climate action. The Climate2Equal initiative was launched in Pakistan in January 2023, and in Egypt it was launched in June 2023. And since then, we have had about 22 private sector companies from Pakistan pledging on gender inclusive climate action from various sectors, including manufacturing, textiles, agribusiness, and energy. And about 14 companies from Egypt pledging on gender inclusive climate action from sectors including manufacturing, F&B, retail, infrastructure, agribusiness, and pharmaceuticals. And I also see that many of these companies are, joining us today in this webinar. So under Climate2Equal, we conduct a series of learning webinars, such as this one that we're conducting today, and also in-depth capacity building workshops to companies in implementing their pledges. So we have companies pledging on various areas, including increasing the representation of female leaders or employees in companies' climate projects, creating awareness amongst the company on gender and climate, and many other pledges. We also have companies pledging on integrating gender equality into supply chains, and this is exactly what today's webinar will be focusing on, to highlight the importance of and ways to and to address gender gaps in climate critical upstream and activities within local and global supply chains, and relevant to businesses in both Pakistan and as well as Egypt. So now I'd like to begin by inviting our speakers to just introduce themselves. So Alice, over to you to just introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks so much. Hello everybody, lovely to be here today. My name's Alice Allen. I work with Business Fights Poverty, which is a social impact network. So I spend a lot of time supporting companies to address environmental and social challenges in their supply chains. I also lead a UK government programme called the Work and Opportunities for Women programme that focuses on supporting women in global supply chains. Spent many years working at Care International on women's economic empowerment, and before that had a long career working in government and international institutions around policy frameworks such as the UN's Business and Human Rights Framework. But looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Alice. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi, I hope I'm not having internet issues as my computer seems to be threatening, but I'm Catherine Heller and Katie, and I work with the IFC's Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Team. So we work with IFC investment projects and help to improve business and development outcomes by helping companies to find ways to create more gender equity in their projects, specifically in infrastructure. For a long time, I've worked in infrastructure as well as natural resources sectors, specifically on gender issues, and basically spend all my time advising companies on how to integrate gender in terms of getting more women in the workforce, more women in their supply chain, and looking more closely at how to engage women in their community relations and impact assessments and things, and across all of those on addressing gender-based violence. And I'm currently based in Egypt.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Over to you, Alison.
Hello everyone, great to be joining this webinar today. I'm Alison Ward, I'm the CEO of Cotton Connect. Cotton Connect is a social enterprise. We work right back at the beginning of cotton supply chains and have projects in Egypt and Pakistan. And then what's quite critical is we connect that cotton into global brand supply chains, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. And my background, I've been here 10 years. Before that, I worked in the cocoa sector. And really the thread that runs through my career is looking at women in agricultural supply chains and looking at how we can empower and give them more voice. So I'll be talking a bit about that later as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Okay, so I'd also maybe just like to hand it over to Nazish and Dr. Sylvia. Just quickly introduce yourself. I'll just through the agenda, and then we'll be having some welcome remarks by Dr. Sylvia. So over to you, Nazish.
Hi everyone. I'm representing the Pakistan Business Council here. I head the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business. IFC is an important partner for us in for advancing gender in the workplace, especially, and in this project Climate2Equal, we're very happy to have a lot of participating companies who have pledged to move towards gender inclusive climate action, and I'm looking forward to sharing the results of this in August, which is just around the corner after summer. So over to you, back to you, Zara.
Thank you, Nazish. And now maybe we can go ahead with the welcome remarks. So I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Sylvia Menessa, who is the CEO of the American of Commerce in Egypt. It was very kind of her to be able to join us today. So over to you, Dr. Sylvia, for the welcome remarks.
Thank you. I'm just Sylvia, no doctor. So I'd like to really thank all the very prominent lineup of speakers that are honoring us with their presence today. Very special thanks to IFC, our long-standing partners. We've been working with them for years on several projects, mainly on empowering women. And so we're quite fortunate for this collaboration. A very brief note about AmCham Egypt. We are the leading private sector organization in Egypt. Our membership covers more than 1,200 companies, US multinational and Egyptians, represented by 2,200 CEOs and executives. Now we have 24 sector-focused committees that help us address our advocacy agenda, which all focus around having a more conducive environment for business in Egypt. One of the very, very prominent committees is our Women in Business Committee. So on behalf of our Women in Business Committee, our long-standing partners at IFC, and of course the Pakistan Business Council, it does give me absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. Creating gender-inclusive supply chains for achieving net zero emissions involves recognizing and addressing the disparities and challenges faced by people of different genders throughout the supply chain process. By integrating gender perspectives into sustainability efforts, organizations can foster more equitable, resilient, and effective pathways towards a carbon neutral future. We are beyond privileged to be involved in the continuation of this series of webinars with, as I call them, our long-standing partners, IFC, as part of our collaboration with the Climate2Equal initiative, and really look forward to a fruitful webinar. Again, thank you all. I see we have a very, very high attendance, and this only reflects on the importance and the significance of the topic. So it's an honor and a privilege to be joined and to be present with you all. Thank you all, and best of luck in your very important endeavors. And again, we at AmCham are always at your service. We are here to offer every assistance possible to IFC and to the Pakistan Business Council, and hope to welcome you all in Egypt very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Okay, so I'll just really quickly, because I am mindful of time, go through the agenda. So first up, we'll be having Alice, who will be setting the context on gender-inclusive supply chains and presenting a framework and toolkit for initiating gender-just action in supply chains. Next, we have Catherine, who will be diving deeper into setting gender-inclusive procurement and supply chain policies and presenting a supporting IFC toolkit for companies. And finally, we have Alison, who will be presenting case studies by Cotton Connect on gender-inclusive supply chains in Pakistan and Egypt. Following the three presentations, we will have a dedicated time slot for Q&A. So I would like to just request everyone to enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we will try our best to answer all of them once the speakers have concluded their presentations. When all three have concluded. You can start entering questions, but we will respond to them during that time. So just a quick request to the three speakers to kindly, I know there were 15 minutes for each person, but if you could just stick to maybe 10 to 12 minutes, just to be mindful of our time. Okay, so over to Alice for the first presentation.
Okay, great, thank you. I am just going to move to the first slide. Okay, thanks so much, everybody, and really privileged to be here and have this opportunity to talk with you all about these issues. So as I explained before, my name's Alice. I have two hats in my job at the moment. I work for Business Fights Poverty, and I work for this UK government Work and Opportunities for Women programme, WOW. And 2 years ago, the two organisations came together to develop this toolkit looking at women and the net zero economy. And it was the first time we had the chance to do a little bit of digging to find out, why was this an issue, what examples are out there, and how businesses might start to address the challenges. I think it's safe to say it's not only ourselves, Business Fights Poverty, UK Government, IFC, that are interested in this issue. You see USAID launching huge £900 million programmes on these issues at the moment. The Canadians, a lot of people are very interested in this issue right now. So I think quite rightly, I think gender inequality and climate change are two of the greatest challenges we all collectively face. So trying to work in ways that address both of them is super important. So this piece of work led to some research into certain supply chains, and it also led to some pilot projects with companies, and I'm going to talk a bit about those in this presentation. My presentation is going to basically set out why this is an issue, what the motivations are for it, some examples of action, and some steps that you can hopefully try to think about taking in your own businesses. So why is this an issue? Why should gender and climate change be looked at together in supply chains? Well, first of all, let's just briefly remind ourselves about why women in particular. And I think the important thing to note is that women make up very large numbers of workers in key sectors that are impacted by climate change. If we take just two of those, and they're the two I've spent most of my time looking at, if we look at agriculture, where women make up at least 43% of the workforce globally, or we take the garment sector, where estimations suggest at some point, in some cases, women represent up to 80% of the workforce. You know, women are impacted and are part of these supply chains. They're often invisible, they're often the least well paid, but they are there. So it's important we think about them. Number two, women are disproportionately, I suppose, impacted by climate change in two ways in particular. Firstly, when it comes to the transition to a green economy, women are already sort of on the back foot because they have less of the skills that are required for that transition, whether that is STEM skills, whether that's access to digital technologies, etc. And they're also impacted more by the physical impacts of climate change. If you just take things like natural disasters, women often, their freedom of movement is more hampered than men, so they are often more likely to remain in a house when the floods are rising, and therefore the death rates of women in natural disasters and emergencies is often higher than men. So they're disproportionately affected in multiple ways. But I think the other really important point to make is that women are often part of the solution. So we need to think of women as agents of change in solving climate change. There are a number of different pieces of evidence out there, things like women are more likely to establish and run businesses that support a green economy, mitigation and adaptation programs that involve and engage women tend to be more successful because they're in it for the long term and they're in it to solve and support their wider communities. And also interesting statistics out there around women as consumers, in the sense that often it's thought that women tend to buy or want to buy more sustainable products and services. So lots of reasons why it's important to think about women. Why are business starting to think about this? So the sort of ideas here on the right of the slide. I think there are a number of factors, and for me the light bulb moment, it was great that you started this session with a question about indirect emissions, because for me this is what made this issue a reality, because lots of companies are making ambitious net zero pledges. Lots of companies are starting to think about what that means in their direct emissions, so what they can do vis-a-vis their offices or transportation or recycling. But what was less perhaps known is that their indirect emissions are, as we've learned already, often responsible for up to 65 to 95% of their emissions. So trying to get a handle on how to address those deep in their supply chains is becoming more and more of a priority and an urgency for people to try and work out and understand. And it's not easy, and we haven't got all of the answers yet by any manner of means. But the impetus for trying to act is clear. We're not going to meet those net zero targets unless we work out how to solve indirect emissions. But the opportunity in that is that we can address lots of these long-standing challenges we've had deep in supply chains. There's going to be more focus on it, more mandatory reporting. That's the other thing that's on this list. The regulatory frameworks are changing. So in the US and Europe, you've got increasingly regulations coming out that might well lead to mandatory reporting on Scope 3 emissions. So much more focus on the sort of social side of reporting. And then we've also got the investor community. So the investor community are very, very interested in gender and climate change. I think they see these realities as super important. So I think in 2020, there was a statistic we included in that report which showed that by the end of 2020, 18 billion in assets were managed by gender lens investors. So there's an impetus there as well to be acting. But in many ways, those are the sort of the sticks, I guess, the reasons to act. But there are, I think, also massive opportunities in thinking about these two things together. So the diagram in the middle of this slide tries to set out that if you bring your environmental colleagues in your business together with those that are responsible for social issues, actually sitting down and thinking through the challenges together could lead to really exciting new innovations or new approaches that could support your business and could lead to potentially new products and services and greater outcomes. So if we take the garment sector, I understand, I think some of you attending are involved in that sector. You know, it's an industry that's responsible for about 4% of global emissions annually. That's the same as something like the UK, Germany and France's economies combined. So it's a big, it's got big responsibilities when it comes to trying to reduce those emissions. You've got people on the sort of environmental side of kind of brands and factories thinking about issues like environmental waste, overproduction, new toxic, you know, how to address complex petrol-based fibers, recycling, and then you've got people from the social side working in this sector dealing with issues like automation and potential job loss of women workers in that sector, overheating in factories, you know, multiple kind of human challenges happening at the same time as you're trying to work out how to reduce your emissions environmentally. But if the two of those groups of people in companies came together and said, well, actually, what are the opportunities potentially for women to be upskilled and involved in assessing our energy production? We need renewable energy to fire up the factories. How could women be involved? Or the recycling, the offcuts and the waste in the sector. What opportunities potentially are there for job creation for women? So I think it's important that we try and identify the opportunities around this as well as just the risks. So there are rewards and risks to be had. Anyway, right, so that's a bit of the context about why this is an issue. Then I wanted to show you some examples of how we tried to think about this in the toolkit. So Scope 3 emissions essentially include thinking about things like the raw materials, so where the stuff comes out of the ground. Everything that we pretty much do and use is based in nature and comes out of the ground somewhere or somehow. The manufacturing, the distribution, the end of life of a product, and of course the consumer use of the product. Now, our toolkit didn't really look into the consumer use of the product because we were focused on the sort of upstream end of the supply chain, but that is a crucial aspect, an area that needs to be looked at as well. But for today, the examples I've got here start with these 4 areas. So in raw materials, this is an example that we included in the report and that Alison will be able to talk to in much more detail. But examples, for example, where Primark and Cotton Connect work together to look at how they could both reduce emissions in their supply chain by using less pesticides. Pesticides take large amounts of energy to produce, which is why they have a high carbon footprint, as well as the degradation of soil, etc. But they found ways to ensure that women were trained in organic farming methods, could increase their incomes whilst also reducing the emissions produced in that supply chain. So a nice example there, and there are quite a few emerging examples similar to that in the agricultural sectors and spaces. If we jump to the next example under manufacturing, this is a timber producing company in Africa who undertook a kind of workforce diagnostic. They were looking to the future. They were thinking, what roles was their business going to need in future? And how could they ensure that women were going to play some of those roles in the processing end of things? So they got some support and funds from Development Finance Institution to do that, and were able to adapt and think about their workforce and upskill women in their workforce. Distribution. This is a super interesting organisation. I don't know if you've come across, but Frontier Markets, Indian-based organisation that have really harnessed the power of women as sales agents across India. They're now, I think it says here 10,000, but I think they've now got 40,000 women selling not just green energy products, but also technology, household goods, etc. And they've really tried to crack how to support people to use and fix and mend green energy solutions, which can often be a challenge. And then if we go to the end of life example, we've got a body shop example here. I know they've recently been bought out. We don't know what's going to happen to them, but they and other organisations, we're supporting Unilever to look at this as well, are really thinking about job opportunities or job creation for this massive new sort of explosion in pet recycling that is happening. So how to reuse and recycle plastics, what are the job potential opportunities for women there, and how do we make sure those jobs are dignified and quality jobs for women. So lots of examples of where to think about focusing your efforts around gender and climate change. These are some more examples. These are projects that I'm currently working on with different companies through the UK aid programme, 3 of which are sort of at the raw materials stage and are agricultural companies. So we're looking at the tea supply chains and we're looking at fresh produce supply chains. And then 1 is more at this end of life part of the supply chain, and that's with consumer goods company, and looking again, as I say, at this recycling piece. And what we find, there are lots of these sorts of individual projects out there, but how do we start to tie this all together and try and think through, I suppose, the how? What sort of frameworks? If you are coming to this new, where do you start? What do you think about trying to do? And we recently produced a sort of further piece of work that looks in a lot more detail at the how and what businesses can do to tackle these issues. And we came up with these sort of 4 broad steps to consider. The first one being strategy. So as I mentioned earlier, there are regulations on the horizon, there is investor interest. What is it and how do you build that kind of high level buy-in to trying to address these issues and include and ensure that it's part of your overall corporate strategy? What then can you do about thinking about how to bring those environmental and those social colleagues in your business together? A nice way to think about doing that is this process called heat mapping. So thinking about where are your biggest emissions in your supply chain and where are workers, particularly women workers, potentially most at risk from different human rights issues, and are there any overlaps between those 2 things? Are there any opportunities where your 2 teams could think about working together? And then there are some sort of practical actions you can take once you've kind of once you've got the buy-in from your company to do this, once you've identified where in your value chain or the supply chain you might want to take some action. What are the sorts of things you can do? Well, we've listed here. So one of the things is obviously around supplier engagement. A massive part of this Scope 3 piece is going to be about working with suppliers. There's going to need to be a huge shift there. So how can you support them with this shift, but also how do you incentivize them to make the changes? There's lots of good examples and ideas in there. There's a procurement piece, which Catherine's going to talk more about, but ensuring that you are trying to prioritize and target and integrate women-owned enterprises and businesses into your supply chain, particularly those that are focusing on perhaps green energy or other solutions that will also help you reduce your emissions. And then thinking about the products and services that you are making. Are there ways that you could adapt or change or shift those? And then, of course, also new business models, because a lot of what I'm talking about today is about thinking and rethinking ultimately your business model and that need for a shift towards more circular approaches. And then finally, if you've exhausted all of those options, there is, of course, also the piece about carbon removal units. So only when you have managed to make as many changes as you can, and you might have some residual emissions left, should you think about purchasing carbon credits. And there are some really exciting and interesting initiatives out there currently that are really trying to prioritise and ensure high quality carbon credits that do impact and benefit women are out there, and organisations like W+, the W+ standard that WOCAN have been developing are really exciting ones to look at. And that is where I will finish my whiz through. There are lots of resources out there on this. Obviously, Climate2Equal have got brilliant things for you, but there are also some other business networks that are increasingly focused on these issues, and that we can leave with you in the slides. But I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was really helpful. Thanks for setting the context, and especially for sharing examples of action that, specific actions that companies can take in supply chain, whether it's raw materials, manufacturing, or distribution. In fact, we can also share the link to this toolkit in the chat so that people can, have access to that. Now I'd like to hand it over to Catherine to take us through your presentation.
Okay, I'm taking control here. Seconds. Okay, great. So as I mentioned, I am with the IFC Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Team, and we are working with companies on integrating gender on specifically on workforce, so hiring more women, turning workplaces into spaces where women and men can both thrive and advance. We work on supply chain, so how to get more women-owned businesses into the supply chain, and then community and across all of those gender-based violence. As part of this work, we've recently also published a toolkit. So it's a day full of toolkits, which is a fully online toolkit full of tools to support companies, including on the supply chain piece. So that is how I'm coming to you today. I wanted at first to talk a little bit about the nexus between the climate change and women, but I think Alice has fully covered that. So I will, in the interest of time, I think she's set that stage very, very well. But I wanted to go also a little bit more into the benefits of integrating women into the supply chain, because that's really where our toolkit is focusing on, making a business case to companies to really help them see the business benefits of investing in and working with women-owned businesses. So we found that increasing opportunities for women in the supply chain in more formalized ways in higher value sectors can have a number of benefits, not just for businesses, but for women. It reduces their vulnerability to climate change, as well as vulnerability to climate change mitigation activities. Oops. Sorry, next slide. Yeah. It can put them in positions to contribute to climate change mitigation through innovation and increased economic empowerment. And by empowering them economically, it can empower them socially as well, with important economic and social impacts. For companies, having more women in the supply chain can lead to reduced procurement spend. So companies that prioritize supplier diversity, including gender, have greater return on procurement investments. They can do more by spending less. They have a stronger supply chain by appealing to a wider range of suppliers. They're building local businesses. They're integrating themselves in the community. They're strengthening their supply chain by having a wider range of people they can rely on. Greater supply chain diversity has stronger and larger supplier networks that can contribute to higher quality inputs and more competitive prices over time. It supports innovation, which of course can be important to fighting climate change, and diversity for consumer-facing companies. Suppliers that reflect the diversity of the customer base can help to more quickly anticipate, innovate, and adapt to changing user needs, and helps connect with the community. Working with women-led businesses can be an important connection to the community, can support women's economic empowerment, support community stability, growth, economic development, all of which can yield positive dividends for company community relationships. And finally, good for the environment. According to a 2020 BNP Paribas report, 54% of women entrepreneurs prioritized a reduction in their carbon footprint in their investments beyond financial returns, compared with 41% of men. And according to Bloomberg research, firms with women making up at least a third of directors have lower emissions growth rates and score better on environmental disclosures. So there's a lot of benefits for everybody from supporting engagement with women-led firms. But with all these benefits to be gained, what are the issues that we're facing keeping women out of the supply chain? I mean, you'd think it would be a no-brainer. But in many countries, women still face a number of restrictions to being in business. They can't open bank accounts. They can't work past certain times. They're restricted in the industries they can be involved in. They can't use land as collateral. They often have a harder time getting loans, have less access to the internet, or don't own their own mobile phones or have limited access. And they often have more limited networks for business experience in terms of their social and business networks. What is limiting their participation in company-specific supply chains? What we found from a demand side, companies often have trouble identifying local women-owned businesses. They don't recognize the opportunity in identifying women-owned businesses. In terms of climate resilience, they may not recognize the extra benefits of seeking out women-owned businesses. They may find it more challenging to work with women-owned businesses if they're smaller or newer. They may have procurement policies in place that are unintentionally discriminatory towards smaller firms or women-owned firms, or discouraging to women business owners. And from a supply side, the women-owned businesses themselves, they are often smaller, often concentrated in a few sectors. Smaller companies often can't meet larger orders that bigger firms might require. They might need payment more quickly, or not be able to provide a whole range of services, rather smaller orders for more specific services. And women-owned businesses, as I mentioned, may lack the business networks to find out about opportunities or have trouble competing against more networked competitors. So ideally, we'd like to be creating both opportunities for women as well as giving them the training and support to step into jobs that face this new economy. Or we're trying to make sure that they can access the opportunities from where they are so that they can benefit from growth and new opportunities. So to increase opportunities for women, there's a range of things companies can do, from investing in training and upskilling for women to helping to adapt requirements for climate neutral supply chains. Companies can modify procurement policies and processes to support and encourage more women-led businesses, and they can assess how they're doing it, how they're doing in terms of women-owned business engagement, and assess how they're doing in terms of finding suppliers, and how their policies may positively or negatively impact women. But of course, that's a lot to ask for companies. So to help out, we have created a whole new toolkit. So our toolkit it's specifically for the infrastructure sectors, but I really think we designed it, an original version for oil, gas, and mining in 2018. Then we expanded it to infrastructure. We currently cover water, power, transport, mining, urban development. We'll be management soon, but I would really say that this can be applied much more broadly. Those are the sectors we had in mind, but I think certainly involving the supply chain, it's much more applicable than that. So it's a fully online web-based toolkit. It includes 4 tool suites, which address workforce, supply chain, community development, and gender-based violence. It also has business cases for each of the infrastructure sectors that I mentioned, specifically outlining why it makes business sense to get women involved in all these different aspects. The tool suites, each tool suite has tools for how to assess a particular company for gender inclusion, how to make concrete changes, so how to address it, and then how to monitor and sustain progress. The whole toolkit has over 60 tools. 10 are specifically focused on the supply chain. The tools are meant to be super concrete and specific. So we have terms of reference, checklists, code of conduct, guidance, notes. So the idea is really that you could take any of these tools, and for many of them, like a terms of reference or a checklist or a code of conduct, you could really, take it, download it, adapt it, change specific things. But of course, customize it, but the idea is that it's meant to be like very plug and play. You can access everything online. You can download the whole tool suite, or if you see in the top right, there's this My Toolkit feature. So you can go there and just choose the specific, like out of the 60 tools, you choose the specific ones that appeal to you and download them as your own specific PDF. So you're not wading through lots of materials that you don't need, makes it much lighter to download. So we've tried to make it super user-friendly and practical and ready to use. So in terms of the key elements of getting women into the supply chain, including in climate-sensitive industries, our toolkit is broken down into 3 steps. The first, as I mentioned, is assess and prepare. So figuring out what you need to do, where you are to get everyone on board. So the first tools that we have are for how to do an assessment. It could be a self-assessment, could be an independent assessment, to figure out things like, do you have women-owned businesses in your supply chain? Do you have any targets for engaging with women-owned businesses? Do you even keep track? Because very commonly, the businesses that we work with don't even have a clue whether they're engaging. They're not. It's just not a metric that they're monitoring. For your supply chain, is there a code of conduct for engaging women employees, for how companies are engaging with communities, for instance? Does your procurement policy in any ways inadvertently discriminate against smaller or newer businesses? So, you know, are you bundling contracts, or are there long delays between payment and delivery, which are both things that can make a big difference to a smaller firm? Are there sectors of your supply chain where transitions to carbon neutrality may be cutting out women's businesses? And are there opportunities to change that, to bring women-owned businesses in? For instance, are you moving towards automation in sectors where women are doing work? What about, you know, recycling? Are you exploring this? Are you tracking this? Are you addressing this? So that first step is assessing where things stand currently. The second is how to address it. And I should say, in this assess and prepare, we have a checklist. We have some guidance about thinking about these things, and then we have a very detailed checklist full of questions. So if you wanted to assess yourself, you can pick and choose the questions that apply. In terms of addressing, we have tools for developing a business case. Sometimes it's a bit chicken and egg. You know, are you doing this work because you already have people on board, or are you doing this assessment to get the data that you would need to get leadership on board with doing some gender-focused activities? So we have tools for how to develop the business case if there's not strong internal support and you need to gather the evidence to develop the business case. So you can focus the information on how it can strengthen the supply chain and also how to meet sustainability goals. Then we have tools on defining how you as a company will define women-owned businesses and set targets. We have tools on how to develop a code of conduct and a comprehensive gender diversity supply chain program. And then guidance on investing in local capacity for women-owned businesses to help capacitate them to be able to meet your needs as suppliers. And finally, we have tools for monitoring and sustaining. So we have metrics for measuring performance on all of these things. So just very quickly, some examples of our work on this. In Guinea, we've worked with a company providing training to entrepreneurs and helping them set up a platform among the women entrepreneurs supported by the company to help them leverage how they're accessing grants and opportunities and tenders and training and things like that. IFC also has a program called Climate2Equal, which is a corporate partnership with companies where companies participate in a peer learning platform to share expertise and expand knowledge of best practices on gender inclusive sourcing. And they also can receive mentoring and guidance to achieve their gender commitments. So I encourage you all to check out the toolkit. And if you have any questions, please let me know. If you end up using the toolkit, we have a spot on the toolkit homepage to let us know. We'd love to know how it's going and engage however we can. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was super, super useful. And you know, a lot of the pledging companies whom we interact with in both Pakistan and Egypt are always looking for these kind of tools and guides that can help them, with their pledges, but also obviously in general with making their supply chains more gender inclusive. So thank you for that. And I've also put down the link in the chat so people can access the toolkit by clicking on the link. So now over to you, Alison. You can take control.
Yes, thank you. That all worked very smoothly in terms of technology. So thank you. I mean, great insights in terms of why women are important and the fantastic toolkits. I'm going to talk you through some sort of our practical work today in supply chains in Pakistan and Egypt. I've talked a little bit about Cotton Connect already. So we work in China, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey, and our model is direct to farmer, and it's demand driven. So we very much work with brands and retailers and identify their supply chain, and then, as you can see, our mission is to reimagine those supply chains, so look at how we can improve it. Alice has already talked about incoming legislation. We know that transparency and traceability are critical for these supply chains, and we've actually through our traceability systems now, the equivalent of 1.4 billion T-shirts have been tracked and traced into retailers right from a farm level. And for us, that's so important because once you get that traceability and transparency, you get accountability into supply chains. And a couple of years ago, we were fortunate enough to host a CEO of a major retailer who went back into his supply chain and met a female farmer who supplied the cotton for the garments in their stores. And those kind of interactions are transformational, both from the farmer who was able to share her story and the money she had saved through the programme, but also for that CEO, and as he saw the impact the programme had had, but also the opportunity there was for a global brand to really understand their supply chain, and whether it be about the people in it, whether it be about those Scope 3 emissions. And I think we talked with the earlier stat, our programs can take you right back into that supply chain so you can understand your Scope 3 emissions. But I think as we've talked about, we shouldn't forget the people, and especially the women. When I joined this role 10 years ago, women really weren't part of training. They weren't really recognised as a stakeholder in agriculture. Women tend to sow the cotton seeds, they weed, they pick the cotton, they do some first stage separation at the farm level, but really weren't recognised as sort of providing economic input into that crop. And as always, it's the men that were trading the cotton, so it was the men that were doing the cash transactions. So a lot of our work has been with farmers and farm groups, but we've also got 300,000 women in our programme, with a goal by 2030 to reach 500,000 women. And at the heart of it is the partnership with brands. So really creating that accountability and creating that supply chain linkages into global brands. To support us in our work, we have a gender advisory panel. So that's a group of gender experts that meets quarterly. They advise us on our strategy. They also give inputs into our programme. So we're really fortunate to have a group who are really helping us as we go on our journey. We also believe that change starts at home. So at Cotton Connect, we have a Women in Cotton Connect group. So it's a group I sponsor of women in the organisation who are determining how women want to be treated and seen and heard in our organisation. I don't determine the agenda for that group. It's for that group to meet and come back to the leadership team about how they'd like the company to act. So quite important to also look at your own company as well in these debates. I move forward. In terms of what we do, three areas of focus. So the first is building knowledge. We often find that health and nutrition is a gateway into building confidence for women to be part of our programs. And as always, we have to seek permission of the village elders or of the husbands for women to join programs. But obviously, you know, health and education and nutrition is quite often a good gateway. And that can lead to things like rights trainings, whether it be difficult conversations around gender-based violence, whether it be about child rights, and whether it be about women's rights as well. So through that, we're able to build knowledge on a number of levels. In particular, we look at strengthening livelihoods, so agronomic skills for women who weren't being trained, possibly because the training was at the wrong time. It might have been with a male from outside the village, so it wasn't appropriate for them to attend the training. So looking at the agronomic piece and then looking at business management. So we've talked about women entrepreneurs, and I'll introduce you to some of our women entrepreneurs later in the presentation, but also so looking at that livelihood piece, and finally connecting those women into markets, as we've talked about, through direct supply chain linkages and by sourcing sustainable cotton. So for us, they're the three elements that we see within our programme that support this sustainable future. Last year, we interviewed a number of women in cotton communities to understand the impact of climate change in their community and on their lives and livelihoods. And we really found that there was a huge impact in terms of both income, an increased pressure on time, and actually impacting on their health. And this was due to rising temperatures. So as you know, sometimes over 50 degrees C in some of these rural communities, you know, flash floods, erratic monsoon, all affecting women and affecting them most critically. Through our work, we're really increasing our training and awareness raising. And the first thing is actually talking to women about climate change and helping more women be more aware of changing climates and the adaptation needed. We also have a pilot of women climate change ambassadors, so a small group of 35 women who have been trained on climate change mitigation. They in turn have trained other women in their villages, so now we have a cascade into 1,200 women. So a small start, but something we'll be looking to expand now we know it works. I was fortunate enough to meet some of our women climate change ambassadors in January, and I think for me the real difference was that they were so proud to have been selected and so proud to have this title of ambassador in their village, and that was really gave them the confidence, it gave them credibility in the village, and they really wanted to share what they had learned with other women. So I think this women as leaders, empowering women is so important as we look at this agenda. And we can really see that this shared learning has impacts right across women's life and livelihoods. If we look at brands, we've talked a little bit about ESG goals, and we've got specific projects in Pakistan and Egypt. So looking at addressing climate change, improving livelihoods and resilience of that sometimes fragile supply chain. We've talked about traceability and transparency already, and the compliance with legislation that Alice has referenced, and also really meeting that consumer need. Consumers are expecting brands to be accountable for this. Unfortunately, as we know, consumers aren't prepared to pay more, but they do have raised expectations from brands and retailers to be acting in this way. So let's just meet a couple of people from our programme. So this is Sharu May from Pakistan, and she works with Reeds, who many of you know, who are a very well-established NGO in Pakistan. And here we've introduced an additional livelihood into this family, and she's become a milk seller and now has a flourishing milk business. And we saw after the devastating floods 2 years ago in Pakistan that the real need for a more holistic approach. I think traditionally it's easy to focus on the cotton crop, but really looking at how we can bring additional income and livelihoods into these rural communities. And also when we do face complete crop failure, there are opportunities for women to bring in additional income sources into the household. So very important from a resilience point of view. The second lady is Parveen Bibi, again from Pakistan, working with the Indus Development Programme and Syngenta. Again, a micro business selling earthenware pottery, but again, a flourishing business which has really increased her income. And also she's become a source of inspiration locally. And I think as we look at enterprise, we quite often talk about female entrepreneurs. Some of these businesses are very, very small, but actually have a very large impact when we are looking at the lives and livelihoods in these communities. So although it's small, we can multiply that and provide inspiration to others. If we go over to Egypt, we have a program with the White Company, and here we've got Sahim Saleh, a farmer from Samul, and she's been learning about sustainable agronomy, so sustainable farming practices. So learning about green manure. So Alice referenced pesticide use. So this is swapping farmers from traditional pesticides into green pesticides. She works alongside her husband, and it's great to hear that they're making informed and joint decisions. She's expecting to see an increase in yield. So direct impacts on her income and livelihoods, her status in the community, but also we will be able to measure a greenhouse gas reduction from that work she's done. And finally, we meet Nawal Abdal from Hamid, again from Egypt. Cotton is really important for her as a widow with 3 children. She's really taken forward our sustainable farming practices that we talk to her. So reducing pesticide sprays from 10 to 7 an acre and saving quite a lot of money, is expecting to increase her yield, and has also been able to supplement her income by purchasing cattle as an additional income source. So we just wanted to go right back to the field and share some stories from some of the women, the inspirational stories from some of the hardworking women that we work with. And just as I close out, really some learnings and recommendations. So for climate advocacy, really looking at women to be empowered and be these agents of change we've talked about with accurate knowledge. I've already referenced that targeted training is key. So we have to understand what the barriers are for women to attend or not attend training. So we're really clear about how we can encourage more women to gain more knowledge. Again, looking at women as leaders and innovators. So our climate change ambassadors, or quite often we hear about women who have been on our training courses and how their status in the village changes. They've got knowledge, they've improved the family income, and their whole status in the village improves, that they are, really seen across the village as being able to contribute into that household and into that community. It's easy to talk about transformational supply chain partnerships, but we've been really looking to build programs with brands and retailers who don't want to sit at the end of the supply chain anymore with an order sheet and tick some boxes, but brands and retailers that really want to understand their supply chain, get involved. And now I think in the past 10 years, we've really gone from a very opaque supply chain in cotton to one where brands and retailers can name the farmers who are part of their supply chain, and so often have been out to meet not only the farmers but all of the actors within that supply chain as you go up into ginning and spinning and into the mills. So very much about creating partnerships where there's dialogue and there's understanding. And finally, something I've alluded to already, we work with amazing on-the-ground partners. Quite often they're NGOs, and what's so powerful about this is that they've been working in these communities for many, many years. They understand the social dynamics, they understand what's happening in that village, and they know how best to sort of approach and organise training. So for us, we bring agronomic expertise that we train our partners, but it's that localization of that knowledge and that localization of action that's so important. So for us, it's about empowering women to transition from being affected from climate change to being really becoming part of the solution. So thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you so much, Alison. Listening to the really, inspirational stories that you shared, I hope everyone found it as inspirational as I did. And on that note, we actually have one question for now. I'd like to open the floor for questions to all of the attendees. So please feel free to type up your questions in the Q&A box. I'm also mindful of time, but since we have one question, I'll read that out. And I believe this is for Alison. So for the companies in Pakistan or Egypt working with Cotton Connect, have there been instances to date where companies have been able to increase competitiveness or access new markets after integrating gender diversity into their value chains?
Yes, I think probably the main difference is that farmers are now selling into a supply chain that they're aware of, whereas before they just sold into the market. So now our farmers are selling into a dedicated supply chain. And I think, certainly we saw, I've referenced the floods in Pakistan. As soon as that happened, we knew which farmers were affected, which side of the river was affected, and we were able to trigger some immediate support for those farmers. So I think that's perhaps the biggest shift. I think as well, we train on quality with our farmers. So we do train farmers on how they can get the best from their crop. And I think that's also helped them as they negotiate better prices and they negotiate terms within that supply chain. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks so much, Alison. I'm just looking for any more questions. Okay, I guess this would also be for you, Alison. Are there any other supply chains you have assessed apart from cotton within this project?
Yes, so we've also looked at adjacent crops as well. So there's quite a lot of intercropping. So we've looked at spices, we've looked at pulses. I think the compelling piece, and I think we've seen it in cocoa and sugar as well, is that when you have a link to a global market that's very defined, you do tend to get more momentum. And I think our challenge is that for local crops and sort of local commodity crops, we don't get as much traction, if I'm honest. So I think that's perhaps been one of our challenges, but we're certainly looking at we're seeing, as always, cotton's an annual crop, so farmers have a choice every year what they grow. So really looking at some of those other crops around the cotton belts and seeing where we can have more impact as well.
Thank you so much, Alison, for answering these questions. So everyone, you can keep pouring your questions in. I don't see any other for now, but we can answer these later as well. Just because I'm mindful of time. So thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you so much for your presentations. It was really helpful learning more about gender inclusive supply chains. And what I loved about all three was that they all included examples, practical examples, case studies, and tools that companies could really use and benefit from. So now I would like to invite Nazish, who's already introduced herself, but she's head of research at the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business at the Pakistan Business Council, to share her concluding remarks. But before passing it on to Nazish, I'd like to just request everyone to kindly fill in this feedback survey. You can scan the QR code, which is displayed on the screen, or I'm also putting in the link to the survey in the chat box, so you can click on it directly if you want to access it through your laptops. So if you can just kindly fill the feedback survey out, it'll really help us improve our future webinars. So thank you again, everyone, and over to you, Nazish. Maybe I'll just give like a few seconds to everyone to just scan the QR code, and then over to you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sarah. While we wait for the feedback survey to go on, I'd like to thank all of the presenters here. It was a really informative session. And we got 2 toolkits out of this, and then we also got lots of examples as well. And it's good to see the positive impact that organizations can have in their supply chains, as shown by Cotton Connect and their work that they're doing. And it's also good to see that it just like Cotton Connect is just about, I think, about cotton, right? But the impact is beyond that when you look at the families and the households working in those areas. So the community, you see the community developing as well. And I think it was highlighted by one of the presenters that once the community develops, it will help the businesses grow as well. 2 examples that came to my mind as well when I was going through this is that a couple of years ago, Unilever had this program called the Goodie Baji Project. I'm not sure if our presenters or people in Egypt know about it, but what it was, the Unilever Pakistan, it trained the women in communities to about their products and to as hairdressers or vendors, or so overall it helped them reach a market that was sort of not reachable. So at the end, while it improved the livelihoods of the women and made them more stronger and more the households flourished, but it also improved the business as well. So it does give it is a sort of a it does add value again in the end to the business. So it is like it has a positive impact on the bottom line, which we often are asked about. We environmental and social experts are often asked about from skeptics. So why should we invest in these areas? I don't think I know that these questions have grown less over the years, but still we sometimes get